Hello everyone, I'm Director of Elections for Blue Earth County, Mike Stahlberger. You are now starting the second to last video in your Rules and Processes series for your election judge training. Congratulations for making it through the videos thus far. This next video is on our pandemic response and how we're going to ensure that we're keeping our voters and our election judges safe on the election days in 2020. Let's dive into the materials. For the pandemic securities portion of our training, we're going to focus again on the pandemic response, the supplies and protocols that we'll be making available on election day, again, to make sure we're keeping our voters and our election judges as safe as possible. I'm also going to put that in a perspective of all the election judge roles to make sure that we can see how they're going to be impacted as a response to COVID-19. And then, of course, we'll end with some common questions and some resources available to you to make sure that you can get any additional concerns or questions answered. We've already talked and you've already watched many videos about the different roles that election judges will complete on election day. Those judges' roles and those duties will stay the same. However, we're going to do them all under the lens of a pandemic response. Again, making sure that our voters and our election judges are as safe as possible. What we mean by this is that our registration judge is going to make sure that the voter keeps the pen that they sign their voter certificate with throughout the rest of that voting process. They'll bring it to the ballot judge, they'll use it in the ballot booth, and then they'll deposit it by the tabulator when they're ready to leave the polling place. For example, our ballot judges are going to make sure that they're handing out secrecy papers rather than secrecy folders. And our demonstration judges are going to stay farther back from the voters when they're helping them answer any questions. Again, these are just some of the differences, but we want to make sure you're thinking about the normal duties of the election judge, but how they might need to be modified to respond to the pandemic that we're experiencing. So let's talk about the current guidance. First off, it's an important note to make that the current guidance is likely to be ever-changing. And so we want you to follow whatever information is provided in the training classes, but also to be thinking about what might be different on election day and following the directions of your head judge or the county election staff in the polling place if you're working in Mankato. We'll be sure to provide you with the most current and up-to-date information on election day. The current guidance that we're working from is coming from the CDC and the Minnesota Department of Health, as well as guidance from the Secretary of State's office. This sort of information will be available on election day as well. We are going to be utilizing personal prevention measures, such as making sure folks stay home when sick, using alcohol-based hand sanitizer and face coverings, especially cloth face masks for our election judges. We're also going to encourage social distancing with our 6-foot separations and using signs and other messaging to get that communicated to our voters. We're also going to have cleaning protocols with disinfectant spray, and we're going to make sure that our polling places are laid out in such a way to encourage one-way traffic and to eliminate or reduce the amount of congestion at doors. We're also going to reduce the number of shared objects unless they can be cleaned before the next voter utilizes them. As I mentioned, the Secretary of State has provided some very specific guidance. Rather than going through these details now, we're going to make sure that they're available on our county website under the election judge training, and I'll show you how to retrieve that in a later video. The reason we're not going through the detail now is that we want to make sure that it is as current as possible, and that's what will be available on our website. You can pause the slide and read the information if you'd like to see it, but what the Secretary is providing is best practices in general, as well as specific guidelines to our election judge roles, and then also giving us some direction on how to best lay out the polling place and keep it sanitary. We'll implement all of these and provide that information again on election day and with our head judges. Let's talk a little bit more specifically about some of the tools that we're making available on election day for you to use. First off, we will be providing face shields for our election judges. These are rigid plastic or a flexible plastic barrier. They are not a substitute for the cloth face mask unless an election judge is not able to wear a mask for a health reason. We are also strongly encouraging them to be worn by all of our election judges as just one more barrier to help prevent the transmission of the COVID-19 virus. It's also a good physical reminder for voters to keep distance, that we're following protocols, and it's also a good way to keep election judges from incidentally or accidentally rubbing their eyes, reaching for their noses, or something like that. We are going to require our election judges to wear cloth face masks or other face masks as provided by our county, and we will have supplies available of disposable masks for voters. As of right now, we're unsure if we can require voters to wear masks in the polling place, but watch for direction as we get closer to and on election day. Disinfectant will be provided for various areas of the polling place to allow election judges to keep the polling place clean, and hand sanitizer will be readily available as well. But we need to make sure we watch for any spills of hand sanitizer, and also make sure that we're keeping it away from the ballots and from our tabulator and other equipment. We'll encourage voters to use it, but make sure that they thoroughly rub it into their hands to the point of drying before they're issued a ballot or they're going to interact with any of our equipment. Pens will be utilized as necessary on election day. It's how we fill in our ballots, obviously. However, we are going to collect those and sanitize them before reuse, meaning we will provide many, many extra pens to the polling places for these elections. We're also not using ballot secrecy folders. They're replaced by ballot privacy papers that will be recyclable after the voter utilizes them. We're also going to follow the protocols and strategies that are recommended by our health professionals as we get closer to election day. This is going to include lines and queuing and that 6-foot social distancing, and then of course cleaning and sanitizing. Election judges will have a new responsibility to make sure that the polling place is kept clean, and we always are encouraging our election judges to keep and re-clean spaces if there's ever any doubt as to whether or not it's been cleaned recently. We're going to rely on any ideas and suggestions you might have, so between the August and November election, or if you have any suggestions prior to the elections, please let us know, as we will always respond to the current situation and we'll use the best information we have available to us. Here are some common questions that folks do ask regarding COVID-19 and how we're keeping our polling places safe. First off, we've talked about the items that will be provided. We're going to provide items to keep our voters and our election judges safe, and we encourage you to use them to help us do our part in preventing community transmission of COVID-19. You'll also recognize we are not requiring gloves. The health department has clarified that wearing gloves does little to prevent the spread of the virus. Instead, they encourage hand washing and hand sanitizer as best practices. Voters, as of right now, may or may not be required to wear cloth masks in the polling place. It'll be dependent on local and state guidance, and we'll provide signage and other information as we get closer to election day related to that. Face shields are strongly encouraged for our election judges. Again, this is to present a strong message of social distancing and safety protocols, and it's also to provide an extra barrier to eyes and the face of the election judge. We're also going to rely on our election judges to help us manage social distancing. We'll have signs, barriers, and many tools available to help with that regard. If you want to learn more about our pandemic security response, please talk with us, talk with your head judge, look at the informational sheets and signs provided, and then review this video once again or whenever you need to learn more about our pandemic response. We also have some online resources available here to the professional health organizations that we're relying on to give us information and guidance for the election day activities. And finally, as always, I'll provide you with our contact information. We're always more than welcome and willing to answer questions that you might have, especially as they relate to the pandemic. Thank you again for continuing on your election judge training series. You have one more video, and I hope you enjoy it. Thank you.